All right, second part, disaster on the mountain. 2 skiers battle an avalanche. On a beautiful late winter day in 2002, 2 experienced outdoorsmen set out for an afternoon of backcountry skiing in Alaska's Kungrat State Park. This was wild country. There were no ski lifts, cozy lodges, or ski patrols. The 2 men, John Stroud and Skip Repetto, probably said that wrong, had enjoyed the wild beauty of this mountain wilderness many times before. They loved the thrill of skiing in the wild, surrounded by the rugged beauty of the Alaska wilderness. What these 2 friends did not realize was that something deadly lurked just beneath the newly fallen snow. Had they looked hard enough, they would have recognized the danger. But the day was so calm, so beautiful, it was hard to imagine that anything could go wrong. Their first run down the mountain was perfect. But on their second thrill ride down, Repetto felt something strange under his skis. The snow suddenly seemed unstable. Alarmed, he shouted a warning to Stroud. But Stroud's dogs, which had come along to enjoy the splendid day, had already scampered into the valley. Stroud had taken off after them. "Calm down," Repetto told himself. "Everything is fine." But he heard an unforgettable sound. Whoomp! An avalanche. In a split second, the mountain seemed to crumble. Tons of ice and snow peeled away from the slope and began a thunderous, crashing slide down the mountain. Anything and everything in its path would be buried. Trees, boulders, animals, people. Repetto stumbled and fell, but managed to right himself in time to escape. Stroud, however, was caught in a gully, a small pit. He was helpless as the icy wave crashed around him. He clawed frantically at the snow, desperate to stay on top, but the weight of his skis pulled him down. Within seconds, he was covered, first to his waist, then to his neck. Finally, the snow closed in over his head. Stroud was buried alive. Warning signs. Over the past decade, the number of people killed in avalanches each year have been slowly rising. In the 1900s, there were about 15 fatalities per year. Today, the average is 25. Most avalanche victims are outdoor enthusiasts like Stroud, skiers, snowmobilers, and snowboarders. And like Stroud, many of them could have avoided catastrophe. That's because avalanches are not freak natural disasters like earthquakes that strike without warning. Most killer avalanches are triggered by their victims, and there are almost always clear warning signs. Few people understand this better than Jill Fredston and her husband, Doug Felser. Their hand-built house sits on a wind-swept mountainside that is a 45-minute drive from where Stroud and Repetto were caught. These 2 avalanche experts have studied snow the way medical students study the human body, from all angles down to the tiniest parts. Snow is not just a solid sheet of white. It is made up of tiny particles, bits of water, air, and ice that stick together in complex patterns like lace. How these different bits stick together and why they fall apart is key to understanding avalanches. For example, if there's too much space between the particles, a sheet of snow might be surprisingly fragile. This is why the weight of just one person can cause an entire mountainside of snow to collapse. That is exactly what happened to Stroud. His weight, plus the weight of his 2 dogs, had triggered the avalanche. To understand avalanches, Fredston and Felser have also studied Alaska's avalanche history. Felser had spent dozens of hours in libraries reading old newspaper articles. He had studied photographs and pieced together a long history of avalanches over the past century. He has discovered records of more than 4,200 avalanches that have destroyed homes and killed animals and humans. Avalanche School. As co-directors of the Alaska Mountain Safety Center, Fredston and Felser have shared their knowledge with thousands of skiers, hikers, and snowmobilers. Fredston's book, Snow Sense, is perhaps the most respected on avalanche dangers. Her and Felser's Avalanche School teaches people how to recognize avalanche warning signs. Lots of fresh, new snow, steep slopes, sudden weather changes, and high winds can all cause the packed snow to become unstable. These and other dangerous conditions are often obvious, as though Mother Nature herself had posted warnings. Learning to look for these signs and take them seriously is key to staying alive in the wilderness. But even many experienced backcountry skiers don't recognize the warning signs. In February 2012, 7 extremely experienced skiers were caught in an avalanche in Washington State's Tunnel Creek. 3 were killed. The group knew the terrain well. They also knew they were skiing under prime avalanche conditions. Yet they went out anyways. Experts called this the halo effect. The skiers felt safe simply because they were experienced and had skied the area before. Like the skiers in Tunnel Creek, Stroud and Repetto had attended avalanche school. They knew avalanches were common in Chugach State Park, particularly on bright sunny days following heavy snowfall. They also knew the colder, shadowed slopes are more prone to avalanches. Yet just such a slope is where they ventured for their fateful ski run. And then whoomph, it was too late. The avalanche had buried Stroud so completely that he couldn't open his eyes. The snow around him was as hard as concrete. He couldn't move, much less dig himself out. His mouth had filled with snow. Within moments, he started to suffocate. He thought about his dogs, wondering if they had survived. Sadly, neither dog survived. And then he accepted the fact that he was going to die. Repetto, meanwhile, was badly shaken, but he did not panic. He knew time was precious. He had to find his friend immediately. Luckily, the 2 men had not trekked into the wilderness unprepared. They were both wearing beacons, small tracking devices designed for exactly this kind of emergency. Stroud had one strapped to his chest. Even as he was drifting toward death, his beacon was sending out a steady electronic signal. Repetto switched his beacon to receive. Within seconds, it began to flash red lights that directed him to where Stroud was buried. Repetto had other equipment to help him. His ski poles screwed together to form a probe, a pointed tool to search through the snow and debris for buried victims. After a few quick jabs into the snow, Repetto struck Stroud's back. Getting Stroud out, though, wouldn't be easy. He was trapped under 4 feet of snow. A dying man. Strapped to Repetto's backpack was another piece of crucial emergency equipment, a light aluminum shovel. Repetto began to dig as fast as he could. Within minutes, his arms ached. Snow piled up all around him. After 10 minutes of exhausting work, he saw no sign of Stroud. Still, Repetto kept digging. He knew he had to create an airway for his friend as fast as possible. His muscles burned. He was drenched in sweat. At last, he heard a noise. The rasping sounds of a dying man. Repetto dug faster. He dug until the snow was chest deep around him. He dug until he was too exhausted to dig, and then he dug more, until finally he saw Stroud's head. Stroud wasn't breathing. His face was blue. Repetto quickly scooped the snow out of his friend's mouth, and then, to Repetto's relief, Stroud gasped for air. But he was in bad shape. It took 10 minutes for him to regain consciousness fully and another 20 minutes of digging for Repetto to free his body. If Repetto had arrived even 1 minute later, Stroud would have died. In her book, Snowstruck, Fredston says that Stroud's story is typical except for one detail. He survived. The tragic truth of avalanches is that few people do. Fredston herself has unburied more than 40 victims, all dead. Most victims suffocate within 30 minutes of being buried. Others die during their terrifying tumbles down the mountain as snow and debris knock their bodies around like rag dolls. Yet the vast majority of these deaths could be prevented. Avalanches are more likely after a big snowfall. Strong winds are also a risk factor, and so is a sudden rise in temperatures. It's also important to remember that the vast majority of accidents happen off of ski slopes in wilderness areas. And so the best protection is to stay on groomed ski trails and never venture off. Nature sends out strong messages, Fredston says, if only people would learn to listen. The Avalanche Files. Avalanches are becoming more common around the world. This is because more and more people are looking for adventure in wilderness areas prone to avalanches. Turn the page to learn more. It says down there at the bottom, it says, today skiers can be dropped by helicopters into remote wilderness areas where avalanches are more likely to happen. Every year, on average, of 25 people are killed in avalanches in the United States. Humans cause the vast majority of avalanches around the world. An avalanche can move at 80 miles per hour. In April 2015, an earthquake in Nepal set off a massive avalanche on Mount Everest. 12 climbers were killed.